Good morning and welcome to the South Carolina Public Service Commission. Today is Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, and it is approximately 10 minutes after 10 a.m. And we are here for a hearing on 2024-333-E. First, I would note for the record that all commissioners are present in the hearing room. Ms. Wessinger-Hill, would you please explain this docket and our purposes today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The hearing before you today is in docket number 2024-333E concerning the application of Dominion Energy South Carolina Incorporated requesting a certificate of environmental compatibility and public convenience and necessity to construct and operate a new 200 kilovolt transmission line and associated facilities that will be located in Colleton and Hampton Counties, South Carolina. The new line will be known as Ritter-Yemassee 230 kV line number 2. This application is brought as required by the South Carolina Section 58-3310 EDSIC, which is known as the South Carolina Utility Facility Siting and Environmental Protection Act. The hearing before you today was scheduled and noticed by the clerk's office to begin at 10 a.m. on February 18, 2025. Mr. Chairman, upon inquiry of all participating counsel of record, they are present and available for your call for appearances. The docket is ready. And Mr. Chairman, there is one preliminary matter which is related to a request or motion by the South Carolina Department of Archives and History that will need to be addressed.
All right, thank you very much. And we should start at 10. We had some technical problems that delayed us a few minutes, and I apologize for that. You would think it was Monday instead of Tuesday. First, would the parties please introduce themselves, beginning with the applicant, Dominion Energy of South Carolina.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Vice Chairman Williams. My name is Chad Burgess, and with me today is Elizabeth Hutton. We're both in-house counsel for Dominion Energy South Carolina, and we'll be representing the company in this proceeding. It's a pleasure to appear before you this morning, and we look forward to presenting the company's case.
Good morning and welcome. ORS.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and Commissioners Chad Torrey and Claire Benge on behalf of ORS.
Thank you very much and welcome. Mr. Burgess, I think you're the one's going to address these issues we're talking about.
Yes, sir. Just for clarity of the record, by letter dated February 5th, 2005, Ms. Elizabeth Johnson sent a letter to the commission indicating that she works for the Department of Archives and History, specifically the SHPO, and she specifically requested a confidential version of Appendix C, which is the cultural resources portion of the environmental report. I had a conversation with Ms. Johnson this morning before coming into the hearing room. She and I have worked out everything, and the company will be sending her those documents that she requested later today.
Thank you very much. We had that on our docket for Thursday, but that takes care of that then.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Any other preliminary matters before we begin testimony?
Mr. Chairman, I would just add one thing. We'll file a letter. Ms. Boyd had requested that we file a letter responding to that, so we'll follow up today's hearing with a letter letting y'all know that we've indeed provided those documents to Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much. All right, it's your case.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dominion Energy South Carolina calls Nathan Bass and Scott Parker to the stand.
Come forward and be sworn.
You solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Mr. Parker, I'm going to start with you, and then you'll need to turn that microphone on for me. Would you please state your full name for the record?
R. Scott Parker.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
Dominion Energy South Carolina, Manager of Transmission Planning.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direct supervision and pre-filed in this docket 13 pages of direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have
Excuse me, Mr. Burgess. Mr. Parker, to make you more comfortable, you can move that microphone and pull it closer to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Parker, do you have any changes or corrections required of your testimony?
No, I do not.
If I ask you all the questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
They would.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would move into the record the pre-filed direct testimony of R. Scott Parker as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Parker will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Parker, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
I have.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Good morning, Chairman Powers, Vice Chair Williams, and members of the Commission. In my testimony, I discussed the need and necessity for the construction and operation of one new 230 kV transmission line that will be known as the Ritter-Yemassee 230 kV number 2 line and the associated facilities in Colleton and Hampton Counties, South Carolina, for which the company is seeking a certificate of environmental compatibility and public convenience and necessity in this docket. This line will originate at the company's existing Ritter substation and extend approximately 16.9 miles to the Yemassee substation. The company has determined that the line can be built entirely within existing right-of-way. In addition to the line, certain associated facilities will be constructed and other modifications will be made to the Ritter and Yemassee substations. As we have done in the past, the company identified the need for this line using the transmission planning standards established by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, as supplemented by the company's own long-range planning criteria. This project is required for the prevention of future potential system operating limit violations on the DESC transmission system and to continue providing reliable electric power into the Low Country, including the greater Charleston area. Power flow in the southern portion of the DESC 230 kV system, transmission system moves from the strong sources in the southern region with Southern Company's nuclear and natural gas fleet and DESC's Jasper generating station towards system load in the greater Charleston area. The line will establish an additional 230 kV electrical path between existing DESC transmission substations, increasing the ability to distribute the flow of power more reliably and evenly, ensure system reliability, and prevent overloads on DESC's system. The proposed line and associated facilities presented here, which are scheduled to be completed by June 1st, 2027, serve the interests of system economy and reliability and represent the most cost-effective and acceptable means for the continued transmission of safe, reliable electric power to the company's customers. The public convenience and necessity requires construction of the line and associated facilities as proposed. As such, the company respectfully requests that the Commission issue a certificate of environmental compatibility and public convenience and necessity for the construction and operation of the Ritter-Yemassee 230 kV number 2 line and the associated facilities. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Mr. Bass, I'll turn to you next. Would you please state your full name for the record?
Nathan Bass.
And by whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Pike Engineering as Director of the Facilities Planning and Siting Department.
And did you prepare or cause to be prepared under your direct supervision, direct testimony consisting of 12 pages, which was pre-filed in this docket?
I did.
And do you have any changes or corrections required of your testimony?
I do have 2 changes.
Okay, would you please direct the Commission and ORS to the page number and the line number that requires correction?
Yes. So the first change is on page 1, line 13. My testimony states my position as manager. Subsequent to the filing of my direct testimony, I'm now director of that same department. The second change on page 5, line 18, the word interest should read intersects. Those are the 2 changes.
All right, congratulations on your...
Could you repeat that last one?
Yes. So on page 5, line 18, the word interest should read intersects.
All right, well, congratulations on your promotion, Mr. Bass. With those changes, if I ask you the same questions contained in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we would move into the record the pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Nathan Bass as corrected and as given from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony, Mr. Bass, as corrected, will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand, and congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bass, do you have any exhibits attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
I do.
And are there any changes or corrections required of your exhibits?
No.
All right, Mr. Chairman, there are two exhibits attached to Mr. Bass's direct testimony. I'm going to move them in one at a time. The first exhibit is his environmental report that is identified in his testimony as NVB-1 public, and that's the public version of the environmental report. And we would ask that that be moved into the record and marked as hearing exhibit number 1.
The environmental report will be entered into the record, marked for identification, and placed in the record as exhibit number 1.
And the second exhibit that we would like to move into the record is identified as NVB-2 confidential, and that is Appendix C, which is the cultural resources portion of the ER, and we would ask that that be marked and identified as exhibit number 2.
Pre-filed exhibits of witness Bass known as B2, and what was the second one?
It's NVB-2 confidential, which is Appendix C.
B2 confidential will be marked for identification and placed in the record as exhibit number 2. The confidential version shall remain confidential unless or until the commission rules that such information is not entitled to protection from public disclosure, or if the requesting party agrees that such information is no longer confidential or proprietary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just for clarity, whenever the commission is considering this case, when you take NVB-1 and NVB-2 and put them together, you have the complete environmental report associated with the Ritter-Yemassee 230 kV line.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bass, have you prepared a summary of your direct testimony?
I have.
Would you please deliver that at this time?
Yes. Good morning, Chairman Powers and Vice Chair Williams and members of the Commission. As the company siting and environmental consultant for this line, I am the author of the transmission line siting and environmental report for the Ritter-Yemassee 230 kV number 2 and associated facilities, dated November 2024. This report is an exhibit to my direct testimony and details the research and studies conducted regarding the environmental, land use, cultural resource, and visual effects of the line and the associated facilities. In summary, the report concludes that the proposed facilities will have no significant adverse impacts to land use, soils, wetland streams, flood zones, wildlife, protected species, cultural resources, visual resources, population centers, environmental justice, or aviation. DESC will design the line to avoid placing structures in streams, rivers, lakes, or ponds, and to the extent practical, to span wetlands. However, in the event that a structure may be required in wetlands, access to it for construction purposes will be accomplished on temporary composite or wooden mats. Additionally, no permanent roads will be constructed in the wetlands, and no new forested clearing will occur in wetland or upland buffer zones within 100 feet of streams, rivers, lakes, ponds, or wetlands. No permanent wetland or stream impacts will result from the construction and operation of the line, but the extensive number of wetlands within the line's right-of-way will likely necessitate temporary impacts. Moreover, because of the measures DESC takes to protect wetlands, streams, stream buffer zones, and open waters during transmission line construction, minimal, if any, short-term and no long-term impacts to waters of the United States will occur. Regarding visual impacts, the line will have very low overall visual effects for the following reasons. The line will be built on company property or within existing right-of-way and will therefore not pose any significant visual modifications resulting from right-of-way clearing. Additionally, the line will be built within corridors of existing overhead transmission lines for the majority of its length. Furthermore, significant portions of the line's length will traverse undeveloped areas where existing trees on each side of the right-of-way will provide significant screening, or areas where the encroaching adjacent development has retained a vegetative buffer along the existing transmission corridor. Regarding cultural resources, the company engaged Brockington and Associates to conduct background research to identify all previously recorded archaeological and historic resources within 1.2 miles of the line's route, a windshield reconnaissance survey to identify any previously unrecorded individual architectural resources, and a Phase 1 archaeological investigation. The Phase 1 archaeological investigation included revisiting one previously recorded archaeological site and the recording of 7 new archaeological sites within the line's right-of-way. Brockington has recommended that additional work be performed at 2 of the new archaeological sites if avoidance of impacts to these sites is not feasible. A preliminary assessment of construction methods has concluded that complete avoidance of these 2 sites is feasible. Therefore, no additional archaeological investigations will be needed. Regarding protected species, the company engaged Palmetto Environmental Consulting to conduct a protected species literature and records review and a field reconnaissance survey to inspect the right-of-way for suitable habitat and species occurrences. While several protected species are known to occur in the project area and suitable habitat exists for some of those species within the line's right-of-way, no protected species were identified during the field assessments. DESC will coordinate with appropriate agencies, incorporate best management practices during the development of construction plans, and appropriately monitor construction activities to minimize adverse impacts to protected species and their habitat. As a result, no adverse effects to protected species are anticipated. In short, Dominion Energy's decision to use the existing right-of-way route instead of evaluating other greenfield routes was proper in my professional judgment. Moreover, the company's decision minimizes the effects to environmental, land use, cultural, and scenic resources. No significant adverse impacts to these resources are anticipated. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Bass. Mr. Chairman, the company's witnesses are available for any questioning by ORS as well as examination by the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Burgess. Any questions from ORS?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions.
Commissioner questions? Commissioner Belser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Mr. Bass, I'm going to start with you, if you don't mind. There's currently a 230 line there that's going to be called Ritter number 1, Ritter-Yemassee, anyway, number 1, is that right?
The existing line is a 230 kV line, number 1.
And
it will then be called the 115 kV line after the new line is constructed.
In the transmission report, I reckon I just want to understand what the facilities are going to look like, because I believe from my reading there was a reference that the existing line will be placed on a same pole as the new line. Is that correct?
Well, the existing corridor contains, the entire corridor contains a Santee Cooper line, which is an H-frame structure. It contains a Dominion Energy 230 kV line, and then there's also a vacant position in that right-of-way. The new conditions will be a new single-pole, double-circuit transmission line in that vacant position, and that's going to be the 230 kV number 1 and number 2 lines. The existing Dominion Energy line that is there now will be kept as is and operated at 115 kV.
Okay, is that on the same pole, the poles as the Santee Cooper line?
It's a separate pole line. So there'll be, currently there's 2 pole lines there now. There will be 3.
Okay. That clarifies that. Thank you. Mr. Parker, I want you to talk to me a little bit about system economy and reliability, if you would. Okay. Tell me what the company tries to evaluate, and let's talk about system economy first. What does the company evaluate when trying to determine system economy?
Well, from a transmission perspective, well, it all goes back first to reliability and what, to meet
hey,
all.
let's talk about system reliability first.
Well,
I'm fine with that.
It starts there, and then economy, of course, is a big factor, but it's.
I think the statute says economy and then reliability. That's why I was starting there. But let's start with system reliability.
Understood. Yes, understood. What we typically try to do, and we do per the regulatory standards, is constantly running assessments of our system out 10 years, doing that annually. for a full-blown assessment based on what we expect the generation fleet to be, what we expect the loads to be at the various, all throughout our system. And then we have to run simulations of how the power will flow in an economic fashion to just, if we dispatch our plants in the economic order that is the cheapest and say, uses the least amount of fuel while maintaining reliability. So we run those studies. Then we have to look at, all the various, what NERC calls contingencies, where what happens if this line has a tree fall on it? What happens if this line has something wrong with it where it operates and is open? Then can your facility still handle the flow of power in all these peak load cases, winter, summer, those kind of things? So we're doing those assessments. And where the economy comes in there is again, primarily, we need to be able to run our generation resources in the least costly fashion and make sure the transmission system can accommodate that. The second place where economy comes in then is once we've run these assessments and determined that, like in this case, that we have a problem out in that 10-year horizon that we need to solve where the transmission has a limitation. Then we go about figuring out what the most economical way is to solve that. And sometimes in a temporary fashion, we may, the solution may be, well, what if we, in a case where a certain situation arises and a line does go out, can we move our generators around, redispatch them so that the flow of power will change such that we can mitigate this problem? That usually can work in the short term, but over time, usually there's only so much of that you can do before you need to upgrade your infrastructure. Where economy comes in at that stage is then determining what is the least cost way to do to either upgrade a facility that you have, or in this case, build new facilities that will solve the problem. And not just solve it, I shouldn't say it's always least cost. It should be least cost, but also solve the problem, not just for the 10 years, but for the foreseeable future, so that we don't come back. Even in this case, there was one option that was slightly less costly, but only barely solved the problem, so that we would likely be back in here in 10 years saying we need to build another line. So that's where economy comes in. Long-term looking, these are projects that you want to last 50 years. If you're going to go out there and put in all the matting and put in all the new structures, then you want to make sure you're thinking long-term. So, but those are the two primary ways economy comes into play.
And you've discussed the NERC standards and some of the contingencies that are required by NERC in your testimony. Is that correct?
Right.
And what happens if Dominion doesn't meet the NERC standards?
Well, you're subject to significant fines in that case, depending on the seriousness of the violations, which in general, there's all kind of NERC standards, cybersecurity, operations planning.
Well, let's just talk about transmission right now.
In this case, though, they can be quite severe if you have, because what this all comes down to is if you have an overload of a line like we have in this case, where if this contingency happen or contingencies happens and this line is overloaded, that's where if you don't have a plan to make sure that doesn't happen, then that's where you could potentially, in a worst case situation, get into, okay, this line is overloaded, it trips. Now you've lost another line, the power reroutes to other places, and what could potentially happen if you don't prevent it by planning the system is then another line's overloaded, and that's where you get into a possible cascade situation and then ultimately a blackout. So you're trying to prevent that kind of thing from happening by doing all these contingencies and saying, if we plan this way, then even sort of in a worst case scenario, we're not going to have a blackout is what it ultimately boils down to.
And when you're looking at those contingencies, are you always just looking at this contingency or that one, or are the models that are being run also look at multiple contingencies happening at the same
There's
time?
different categories, and it's both of those things. Where it's multiple contingencies, they do allow for things like, because the more you have, that they deem that less likely, but it could be and often is more severe, but they allow for the things, so it's different categories, but for those multiple contingencies, they allow you in some cases to, okay, if this happens, if you can make adjustments to your system to prepare for that next one happening, you're allowed to do that. But in some cases, say, for a case where there's two lines on one set of structures, then sometimes you have to look at both of those lines. So it'd be multiple contingencies, but it's because they share a structure, so you have to look at that as a, quote, single contingencies. But there's various categories that they mandate that you look at.
And I appreciate that thorough answer, but my next question is, in planning and looking at these contingencies, Dominion is required to look not only at single contingencies, but multiple at the same time. Is that correct? You might have to consider not just one contingency, but two contingencies in your analysis.
Correct.
And y'all have done that?
Correct.
And is this an ongoing process? I think you kind of indicated that it is, that it's something that y'all monitor pretty frequently.
Yes, and I probably mischaracterized it. The NERC standards require that you do an annual assessment, but really we have a group of 8 or 9 engineers, and they are doing these kind of assessments pretty much every day. If it's not for this NERC-mandated annual assessment, it's for all the solar interconnection studies that we're doing, new large load customers looking to locate on our system. You're running these same kind of analysis with these same kind of contingencies to determine, best case is you look at something, a new solar plant or a new large load, and you run this analysis, and best case is we don't need to do anything. The system can accommodate it. Or in some cases, you may say it can accommodate up to so much load, say 100 megawatts, but beyond that, you'll need to do this upgrade or do that upgrade. So the analysis is going on all the time for various reasons, whether it's interconnection of new load, current industry wanting to increase their load, or new, whether it be solar or other generation looking to integrate into our system.
I believe in your testimony you indicated you discussed the southern region and generation coming in from both Dominion system and neighboring systems to transmit into the Charleston area. And this line is located in Colleton?
Yes. Well, yes,
County.
from Hampton to Colleton.
What about areas that Dominion serves down toward Bluffton? Does this add any reliability toward that area as well?
Well,
The reason I'm asking, that seems to be a growing area as well as the Charleston area.
It is, and we've added, we were here, I think, a year ago or so to look for, and added a 230 line down there. That flow of power from the Savannah area into South Carolina goes by way of, as you say, down in Beaufort, up to Yemassee, and then down towards Charleston. So that area between Yemassee and Beaufort is constrained, is somewhat constrained too, which we keep an eye on. But what this does, this is more addressing the downstream between the power coming in from Beaufort into Yemassee. There's really only this one key corridor, which is this one line we have there now, and it's only what we call single conductor. It's not bundled, so it's half the size of what we typically nowadays build. So, probably more than you wanted. But yes, this won't necessarily help that corridor between Beaufort and Yemassee, but it definitely helps the sort of the bottleneck that goes from Yemassee, because that line goes from Yemassee to Ritter to Church Creek, which is right in the heart of Charleston. So it helps that corridor. We're still looking at that and monitoring that Beaufort to Yemassee corridor.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Belzer. Commissioner Caston.
Thank you, and good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Mr. Parker, you're looking at the photos in the report and that Pike did and all, I see I don't know what you call them, but the the wood poles, H with X cross bracing, you know, they're, in the photos, appears to be like two of those. Is that correct? Two existing transmission lines and poles?
Well, the H-frame, it's the two poles is really one set of circuits, three phases, but the two poles support one structure, which is, so it may look like two, but it's one conductor, three phases, three different conductors, but it's what we call a single line made up by those three phases of the, but it's those two poles that support that H-frame is considered one structure.
That I understand, but go ahead.
Yeah, to clarify, there's also a Santee Cooper line also within that corridor, so that may be the photo that you're looking at.
I guess that's what was throwing me, because the photo shows two of those.
It's already confused. Yeah, that's right. I was thinking you were talking about the two poles, and there are two different, Santee is a line, ours is a line, two different sets of H-frame. My apologies.
I should have been more clear. But thank you. And the new pole and lines will be on I think you said a mono steel pole, which, you know, I couldn't find the height, but is that like a standard height? Because it looks like it would be higher than the existing.
They would be taller, so I believe we've tentatively planned for 95 to 120 feet, somewhere in there.
And Mr. Parker, I think in your testimony you talked about, you know, normally that 10-year planning period, but I understood that the concern was with what you're seeing now, within 10 years you could be at 90% of capacity, and I guess part of this is to accommodate that and look beyond that.
Yeah, I should clarify. So what I was, as part of that discussion, with what we have available to us in place now, it would be over 100%. One of the solutions we looked at to solve this was slightly cheaper than what we've proposed here, but in that 10-year horizon, you would be at approximately 90+% of your rating, so you didn't have a lot of room for growth, whereas this will give you down to the 50 to 60% loaded range, so you have a lot more. Will carry us on for many years, and that was the distinction. But with what we have in place now, it will be overloaded within the 10-year horizon, so over 100%.
See, I equate that to putting in a 24-inch pipe instead of an 8-inch pipe, so it makes a lot of sense.
Same concept.
Finally, Mr. Bass, I want to echo Mr. Burgess's congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
And to whom much is given, much is required.
I'm beginning to understand that.
And be thrilled while you can, because I suspect you're going to have moments when you wonder why. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Mr. Parker, I would like to start at a bigger picture level, and understanding that Yemassee to Ritter is, you know, a place where transmission is burdened, but could you give us a glimpse of what we're looking at from a Dominion balancing area perspective? And what I'm thinking about is how much of this is growth, how much of it is, you know, growth in new economic development. We didn't see a lot of transmission improvements over our tenure, and now we're seeing a lot. So I'd just like to add to the record a little bit more about, rather than the individual support, the broader need.
Sure, and it's a good question, and I'm happy to talk about it because it sort of gives the lay of the land of sort of where we are with South Carolina, not just with Dominion, but Santee Cooper as being the two primary utilities in sort of the greater Charleston, Myrtle Beach area, to a lesser extent Progress up in the PD. But basically over time, it really, in my tenure, it's what we've seen is with and this goes back a ways, but with the onset of, so for many years the system was designed with these big coal plants all throughout the state, and we weren't alone in that, certainly everyone. But we had a number of coal plants, particularly in the low country, Conway, and Kennedy's, and some other places that have, with the onset of fracking and the availability of cheap gas and cleaner gas than coal, over time we've removed those resources all throughout the low country, while gas has expanded and run, even where you had plants before that were running on natural gas, before they would run sort of just part of the time in the peak parts of the day, whereas now they run around the clock just because gas is so cheap. So it's a combination of, now a lot of the gas resources runs a lot, and we have continued to reduce how much coal generation is running. Even when it's not retired, our coal plants often don't run at full like they would have so we often will try to back them down, leave them on, but not run at full. You pair that with all the growth in the low country in Myrtle Beach and Charleston, Mount Pleasant, Somerville, all that. So that's a bad pairing as you reduce the generation in that area. Load continues to grow. And then to some degree, purchases have been made often when off-system purchases are made. The sort of the weak spot in the system is that area, because you don't, it's sort of a black hole where you have little generation, a lot of load. The power wants to flow in to that area. The last part of the sort of the lay of the land that is sort of a limitation to us currently is we're surrounded by 500 kV infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, all throughout Georgia, through the upstate, and in North Carolina. And we don't have that anywhere in the Midlands down. And so we only have 230 kV. So the higher the kV, the much larger amount of power that can flow. So that is also why power wants to flow, or is, I should say, constrained on our 230 system, because it's surrounded by 500 kV and it can carry a lot less power than these larger lines can. So it's really those three things. It's a good problem in the way that there's growth, but as we continue to run less generation, there's really, as we've talked about, there's not a lot of gas in the low country. So at least currently, we hope to maybe work to change that. But as you reduce the amount of generation, pair it with load growth, then and old lines, the line that we have there now is 50 years old and is a smaller conductor. So 50 years ago, that was fine. So really about more, let's go back with bigger conductor also, because it's outgrown its usefulness. So it's I guess, I hope I did answer your question as far as kind of what are all the factors at play of what we're dealing with.
I learned a lot. Thank you. I'm glad I asked. Is 500 kV something that South Carolina is going to be looking at, or is that too far out?
We are. I think so. I think it's probably it's inevitable. Probably, when you look at some of the large coal. I should say, with the growth, I can't say it'll be 10 years, 8 years. But if you ultimately want to get rid of all of the coal in the state, and you don't get significant more gas or breakthrough in batteries or whatever, then to replace that kind of power and the continued growth that we'll see, I think ultimately 500 will be needed. It's the higher the voltage, of course, the more expense, the more right of way, the longer lead time to plan and build it. But ultimately, that's what all of our neighbors have. I think we're sort of hamstrung in that respect. So ultimately, I think it'll be needed. Just don't know whether that's 10 years or 15, 20.
Okay. You referenced in that answer and in probably both of your testimonies right-of-way and 50 years ago. One of the things that's impressive about this application is that the right-of-way that you're able to do it within the current right-of-way. This is probably another one of those questions that it's just a really good time for us to learn more. Are we going to, were those right-of-ways purchased with the amount of transmission that we currently have in mind? Are we, the right-of-way we have is good. How much longer is that right-of-way likely to accommodate us?
I guess it may be case by case. We're very blessed that in this case we do have it because not only is it, you know, just from all the environmental and you know, upset of, you know, property, trying to get property for new right-of-way, but also it's key because when you have the right-of-way, in a case like this where this line is so critical, if you didn't have right-of-way to build a new line while leaving that line in service, it would be very difficult to, which is what we often find, especially in the low country, is it's very difficult to work on a line to improve it because taking it out to work on it creates all kind of problems. So when you have right-of-way to build a new line while leaving that line in service, not the entire time, but the bulk of the time, then that's even, you know, that just allows for you to do it in a much cheaper and more expeditious fashion. As far as having right-of-way, I can't say that we have been fortunate to be able to build recent projects in existing right-of-way. I don't know that it's entirely the case that you always, when you go get new right-of-way, that you can make sure you just have room for, that's a constant battle between, we want to make sure when we go out and do these things that we get what we need for the future. We're not just thinking on, you know, short term, but the other thing that I guess that allows us to do that is these H-frames, we're not replacing that one here, but in a lot of cases in the past where we've upgraded transmission, we'll replace those H-frame poles with steel, and that has a much smaller footprint than the wider H-frame. So you free up right away there. So it's sort of a case-by-case basis as to where we are as far as free right-of-way to keep doing this. But I would just say it's really hard to sort of put a number to it. It's sort of hit or miss as to where we have existing right-of-way still to grow.
I appreciate that. You referenced the monosteel frames. What are they kind of guaranteed to withstand from a wind perspective?
So those are there are specs for those that they meet, which is this is a little bit out of my field, but they do. There's a criteria the industry follows called the NESC 250C extreme wind loading. I don't know the exact miles per hour, but those are designed for hurricane type winds that these are designed to meet. So I don't know if that's Cat 5 or what, but it's the kind of hurricanes we expect. You know, we have to plan for in this part of the world.
Okay. You all notified Yemassee, Hampton County, and Colleton County. Was there any follow-up from those governments?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
Me either.
And then this may be more for Mr. Bass, but the land use that you reflect, that's current land use?
That's correct.
Do you look at future land use in the area as well?
So we look at future land use when it's available. In this case, it's such a rural area. There was nothing that we found that would be included.
And Mr. Bass, there were some comments in your testimony about construction and for cultural resources that will have probable views of the proposed line. Can you tell us what those are, just for clarification?
Sure. Those are actually historic areas, so that they're not just a specific site. Let me see, I've got to notice what those are. So those four are the Catholic Hill Plantation, Beach Hill Plantation, Blake Plantation, and there's another unnamed historic area. Each of those are pretty far away from the line itself, the closest of which is Blake Plantation at about 1,000 feet away. Keep in mind, these plots of land, these historic areas are very large. They're, in some cases, hundreds of acres. So the 1,000-foot distance for Blake Plantation, that just assumes the very closest point, but the actual main land use of that facility is significantly further.
So the edge of the property is 1,000 feet away?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is neither here nor there, but I enjoyed seeing the churches and really curious to drive by and see if, you know, it looked like the same architect or the same builder. So thank you for the glimpse. No, that wasn't the purpose, but kind of interesting to me. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Any further commissioner questions? Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Appreciate it. So one thing that was mentioned, Mr. Bass, in your testimony is 7 new archaeological sites. And I guess given that this is an existing right-of-way, I find it interesting that now we're finding out that there's 7 potentially new archaeological sites. I mean, how does that happen? Was this been in place for like 50 years and they just didn't look as hard back in under the old rules, or what?
Difficult to speculate there, Commissioner, but I would say that there's probably been no studies conducted because that line's been in place for so long, and the standards for which archaeological investigations have been enacted are more recent.
Okay. And let's talk about the poles again. All right, so we've talked about the H-frames, the 2 poles, and then the single pole. And so the existing H-frame 2 poles, that's a 230 line, right?
Correct.
And that's going to end up being changed into a 115.
That's right.
All right. So I guess instead of the monopole, could have done another H-frame 2 pole. How was that decision made? I'm sure part of that is due to the space. I mean, does that relate to cost and system economy?
Well, it does. We typically don't do anymore. The H-frame, you know, is out of favor now. It's you know, the footprint, the steel poles are much stronger. System economy, they take up a lot less footprint. We don't do H-frame anymore. We're keeping we're utilizing the ones that are there and converting it to 115 just because there's, you know, really no significant cost with doing that, and it's such a key corridor. We're like, well, let's just, for the foreseeable future, we're going to build these this new 230 line and have 2 new big bundle conductors, but let's continue to utilize this. All the structures are there, and use it as 115 just to sort of give us yet another avenue to distribute that power, because you know, it is such a key corridor. So, but we really don't consider or do H-frame anymore.
And
at least not at this level, not at these kind of 230, 115 kV type transmissions.
Okay. And you were mentioning the 500 kV in, I think you said North Carolina and Georgia, and that at some point might need to move in that direction. I assume that these H-frames at some point in time are just not going to be any good anymore, and I guess those could be replaced with another one of the monopoles, and 500 if it looked like that was appropriate planning?
Yeah, we haven't gotten quite down to that detail. I don't know that the 500 is such a, the right-of-way you need for those if you ever go into the upstate, or if you're in the I know they don't label them, but if you see these big towers and just the weight of them and the clearance that you need, they're liable to be bigger structures. They won't be H-frame. They won't be wood, but where we can utilize, of course, where we can utilize existing right-of-way, that's ideal, and we would. But just, that's another thing about 500 kV is you need a much, quite a bit bigger right-of-way than what you need for 230 or 115. So, but if you can utilize existing right-of-way and just expand it some, of course, that's to your advantage for everyone. So that will be looked at, but that's all part of the evaluation of not just getting 500, but where it needs to go and where you have right-of-way.
Okay. And it's interesting you mentioned the upstate. Over the last month or so, I have been driving around a lot, just coincidentally, and not real far from the Catawba Nuclear Station, and seeing those right-of-ways and those towers. It's amazing the variety that you see and just how big some of them are. But anyway. And you mentioned the 10-year planning horizon, and I guess I'm wondering also, does the 15-year integrated resource planning horizon, does that kind of come into play when you're starting to talk about how much of the capacity is going to be used at the end of the 10 years, and that, okay, we're going to probably need more real soon after that? Does that relate to the integrated resource plan and the 15-year horizon, or are those just two different things?
I think in the past that's sort of the way the industry is sort of, sort of the IRP has been sort of its own thing, and the transmission planning was sort of a separate thing. In recent years, with for various reasons, those are becoming more integrated, and we are, sort of considering transmission in the IRP space more and more. Not just us, but all the utilities are. I guess, the other thing I should mention, and I think we had an ex parte here not too long ago about FERC Order 1920. They are going to mandate that all utilities start planning for at least 20-year horizons. So, so when that takes effect in the next, that date is up in the air. It will probably be next year if we, get the most utilities are asking for an extension. But we will be planning out 20 years in that case, and with some of what they're wanting you to look at, various resource mixes, extreme weather, all these things, they'll be even more integrated. Your transmission planning will be even more integrated with your IRP going forward. So we're moving in that direction. But yes, it's sort of it's a work in progress, but that will be more and more tightly coupled as we go forward, I guess.
All right. And the estimated cost is, I saw somewhere $54 million, I think.
Correct.
And so does that get allocated in a way where other states end up paying part of that, or?
No, that's and that is a big part of 1920. That the FERC Order 1920, where it talks about cost allocation for regional projects. This one though doesn't have any of that. This is a project to meet regulatory and reliability requirements for Dominion, South Carolina. So this is strictly a project that we own and have the need for. So there's no cost allocation to anyone other than Dominion and our customers.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Commissioner Caston?
Yep. Follow-up question, if I may, thinking about one of the questions relative to the parallel system, the existing H system, and I guess the new system. In a previous life, I know we would run transmission lines typically sized for future growth of the plant, or upgrades to a main line or whatever. And oftentimes there would be an existing line, at least a portion that it would parallel. And, you know, it made sense at times, we thought. But then we realized we were maintaining a line that was 40 years, 50 years old, and we were having to repair leaks on a line that not only was redundant, but was taking more time and money. We had this one sized for the future growth. There's that kind of thing, is that considered when you think about these parallel systems?
Certainly that's considered. Anytime we have, well, certainly for anything we have, infrastructure we have to maintain it. And, you know, there is a somewhat, you know, always a cost to that. I guess we don't see, in this case, we would, if we started seeing problems on the 50-year-old line that is going to remain as a 115 line, to where we thought it was not cost effective or didn't make economic sense to continue that line, then we would ultimately make that decision and probably decommission it, and just then we'd be left with the two new 230 kV circuits. But there is a cost for that, but we don't. Nothing that we're concerned about at this stage where we don't think it makes more sense to operate that as a 115 line and utilize the conductor that's already in the air and all the structures that are in good shape currently to just give us more options for distributing that power now. But ultimately, that's always looked at in terms of maintenance, what we're spending, what are the worst acting lines as far as problems go, and that drives where we determine either we need to look at new projects or maybe rebuilding the line that's there. But we don't see that as an issue necessarily at play to why, you know, to where we wouldn't keep this older line in service as a 115 line.
Okay, so
I
what
don't know
I
if
think,
I'm not sure I answered you.
well, what I think I'm hearing is that although the poles and lines are 40, 50 years old, is that correct?
Correct.
That they still have an unknown useful life left. They appear to be in good shape, and I'm assuming since you've reduced the voltage on the existing older lines, you anticipate that, I guess, helping a continued life. Is that a fair assumption?
We do, and so yeah, we believe that we'll continue on. Really, what this was about is needing bigger lines, and when you're doing bigger lines, they can't be put on these older structures. So you need, and when you do new structures, you go steel. So, but to answer your question, yeah, we still feel like there's useful life in the line that's there.
Good enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Mr. Parker, I'm a little confused now. We talked about, I think in your earlier presentation, you said that this would be where you would not have to come back in 10 years and ask for something else by having this 230. But at the same time, I'm hearing that we may need 500 in 10 years. Why we're not looking at 500 now? I mean, does Dominion have 500 in Virginia or other places, or?
They do. What I see driving, yeah, and it's a good question. Obviously, you know, certainly we're always thinking about especially when you're planning out 10 or soon to be 20 years. You're always looking at, well, what am I planning now? And not only is it needed in the next 5 years, but what about what I'm planning for in 15 years? Is the project still going to be needed in that time frame? But you also have to get there you know, you have to solve the reliability issues that you have in that interim to get there. 500 kV of any length or any significance will take years and years to design, procure right away, get the parts. You know, for a significant, significant line, a 50-mile line, say a 500 kV, is probably going to take 8-10 years to get. So you have to get there. I don't think there's none of this that we're planning here, though, will be obsolete in what 500 kV will do ultimately will allow you to replace all the coal plants that you have now that are, if you sum them all up, probably 3,000 plus megawatts will allow you to do that ultimately and allow future load growth. But even with 500 kV, there's these lines will be needed even when the 500 kV gets there, which could be 15 years, 20 years from now. I don't know if did that answer your question?
I don't know. So there's no doubt in a year from now, year and a half, whenever, you'll be looking at a 20-year plan instead of a 10-year plan.
Correct.
Okay. If you know it's going to be, why would you wait to look at a 20-year plan?
Well, hopefully I didn't say. My opinion is ultimately 500 kV will be needed in the low country of the state. Where exactly that is will take a lot of study, where it will need to go. Again, we as I mentioned early on, when we do these assessments, we have to solve these issues in that 10-year horizon and 5-year horizon. Now, you know, we have to solve those problems and comply with the standards regardless of what may come in 20 years. So we always have an eye on what we're looking at in the future, but you still have to plan for the load growth that you have in 10 years and how you're going to comply with those standards. So, which is where this comes into play. And again, this is more about not so much, well, 500 kV will make this obsolete. It's more about these new circuits are needed, are much bigger than what we have now, which was 50 years old, both from wood poles and the conductor that carries the current that's that old that needs to be expanded. So in no way will 500 kV make any of this obsolete, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So this is not a temporary fix then?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I just want to say that just because our current 10-year horizon for running this assessment is what's required, we're still always thinking about, well, yeah, that's how far our assessments go. But when we look to build projects, we're thinking about headroom, and so it's our thinking is beyond 10 years, even if the actual studies that we run only go out 10 years, if that makes sense.
Okay. One other thing you said that kind of set off the alarm a little bit. You seem to think that is there a problem with the service to Beaufort in that area? That you made it sound like that there may be questionable, that there may not be enough. Is that a problem in that direction too?
Well, the Beaufort area, as was alluded to, is growing rapidly. We did come to the commission and you approved a certificate for a new line, 230 line from one of our existing substations further into Beaufort. But that corridor is another area where we share significant infrastructure with Santee Cooper in a constrained right-of-way. So there's concern in that only from the standpoint of there's not a lot of room for growth. We're meeting all the requirements now out for 10, 15 years. But if we continue to see the growth that's there, when I said we're looking at that, it's just that the right-of-way is constrained. So there's not any real room for significant, like there was in this case, where there was room to add another line. That corridor between down in Jasper in the Beaufort area up to Yemassee, which is about 40 miles, we would have to expand that right-of-way and add more circuits, both, like I said, both for what we have and what Santee has in that area. So, and their load's continuing to grow. So that is an area we'll continue to evaluate and study. We have enough now, but as you know, as you might imagine, as you continue to see load growth and you're revising your load estimates, probably need to at some point in that, in this next 10 years, we'll have to probably either expand that right away or look to another, create another right of way to expand that 230 network in that Beaufort area.
And this is not related to any particular industry, anything. This is a general growth, population growth that you feel this is necessary.
Yes, particularly in the low country, and really I know to talk about the upstate where I'm from, South Carolina is booming all over the state. But again, it goes back to the large growth in the low country and the diminished resources to supply the power locally. So what that means is you need to transmit it from elsewhere, which means transmission. So yeah, I think this will be, you'll continue, I think, to see us here for 230 kV predominantly in the low country area, which is what we've been here the last 2 or 3 times.
Do you feel the, and I guess it's just an estimate of the $54 million, do you feel that will change? Do you have reasonable certainty or probability that that is the amount?
Yes, we build in contingency on that to allow for that. As you've probably seen in the news, both lead times and costs for a lot of this equipment and infrastructure continues to grow every year. But we are comfortable with the $54 million that will be enough that's a good estimate, and we'll be able to meet that target.
Do you both feel this is in the best interest of the existing ratepayers that this money be spent?
Absolutely, yes.
I agree.
Thank you very much. Any further commissioner questions? Commissioner Williams?
Thank you, Chair Powers. And thank you again for being here. I think my final questions are for Mr. Bass. And I was thinking about the federally protected species that are in the area. Would you, for the record, kind of clarify how you're going to, how in this project that will be handled should such a species be found?
Sure. So the first thing that we're going to do is apply for and obtain all construction permits in order to do the work. And so some of those permits include the Army Corps 404 and then the State Water Quality Section 401s. So throughout those processes, there's going to be agency coordination that occurs that'll help guide us on what elements to consider and then how to proceed with construction. So that initial consultation is going to really guide how we move forward. But there's always, there's already things that we're planning for. Specifically, a lot of the species inhabit these wetland areas. Fortunately, we don't have any new clearing within these wetlands, but we do have to cross them in some cases. And so Dominion's best management practices of utilizing matting is paramount in order to keep that ground pressure off of those wetlands so that when we remove it, they can restore themselves back to their original condition. So again, the consultations and then utilization of our best management practices. There are certain species such as the spotted turtle that if they are found, there's a process for obtaining a permit for relocating that turtle back off of the construction limits. So we'll coordinate with DNR on that if it occurs.
And this project is, if not all in, or is very close to the Ace Basin and the Federal Wildlife Protection, National Wildlife Refuge. Did that impact this project at all?
Not specifically,
okay.
To be honest.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Any redirect?
No, Mr. Chairman, no redirect.
Anything further from the company?
This concludes our case in chief.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break, if we could be back at 11:30, and then we'll proceed with the case of Office of Regulatory Staff. We're in recess. We are back on the case, 2024-333-E, case Dominion Energy. They have presented their case, and now it is the Office of Regulatory Staff. You may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. ORS calls Omari R. Thompson to the stand.
If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Could you please give your name and occupation?
My name is Omari R. Thompson. I am employed by the South Carolina Office of Regulatory Staff as a regulatory analyst in the Energy Operations Division.
And did you cause to be pre-filed in this docket 10 pages of direct testimony on January 26, 2025? Excuse me, January 16th, 2025.
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your pre-filed direct testimony?
No, I do not.
And if I asked you today the same questions posed in your direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Powers, I'd move that the pre-filed direct testimony of Omari R. Thompson be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
The pre-filed direct testimony of Mr. Omari Thompson will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Thompson, did your pre-filed direct testimony contain any exhibits?
No.
Mr. Thompson, did you prepare a summary of your direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Would you please give that at this time?
Good morning, Chair Powers and members of the Commission. My testimony provides the results of ORS's examination and review of Dominion Energy South Carolina Incorporated's application for a Certificate of Environmental Compatibility and Public Convenience and necessity for the construction and operation of a new 230 kilovolt transmission line that would be known as the Ritter-Yemassee 230 kilovolt number 2 line, and the associated facilities in Colleton and Hampton County, South Carolina. My review focused specifically on the company's compliance with the Siting Act, the nature of the probable environmental impact of the project, whether the impact of the project upon the environment is justified, the reasonable assurances that the proposed project will conform to applicable state and local laws and regulations issued thereunder, and whether the public convenience and necessity requires the construction of the project. Based on the information provided by the company, ORS understands the project may result in minimal impact to the environment. ORS further understands the project may serve the interests of system economy and reliability, and may support the company's ability to provide reliable electric service to its customers. On this basis, ORS does not oppose a finding that the project will serve the public convenience and necessity. Should the Commission approve the application, ORS recommends the company file updates with the Commission and ORS on the construction of the project, completion of the project, and date of commercial operation. This concludes my summary.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Chair, Mr. Thompson is available for questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from Dominion?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner questions. Commissioner Belser.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Thompson. How are you today?
I'm fine. Good morning.
Mr. Thompson, I just want to ask, ORS is recommending updates during the construction of the project. Is that correct?
Yes.
What does ORS envision by updates, and how often?
Well, I would defer to management, but I would assume just to be kept abreast of the current goings on of the project. As far as a timeline or how often they should do it, I don't know that was specified, but that's something that we could communicate with the company.
Okay, it wasn't specified. I just didn't know if every 6 months, every 3 months, every 9 months, if there are delays to notify the Commission. What's your thoughts?
I'm not entirely sure, but that's something we certainly can work out with the company.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Belser. Any other commissioner questions? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chair Powers. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think I have one question. Just to, you talk about there not having been any objection to this project. Since your testimony, are you aware of any public comments or any concerns issued by any of the governmental entities related to this project?
No, at the time of my filing testimony, there were no objections from any of the other governmental agencies. My understanding is ongoing communication with DNR about some concerns they had.
But other than that, no other comments of concern?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further Commissioner questions? Hearing none, any redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Chair.
All right, anything further from ORS?
That's all from ORS. Thank you, sir.
Anything from anyone? All right, Mr. Thompson, thank you very much for your testimony. If there's nothing further, thank you all for your hard work and preparation in this case. Have a good day. We got some tough weather coming. Everyone be safe. I know you got a lot of work going to pop up for you, and have a good rest before then. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.